A good evening to you and welcome to News Sources, your home of content, context and analysis. My name is Julie Masiga. Before we begin, let's have a look at the highlights.
Vile tulisema jana ati no transparency, no elections. Hiyo ndio msimamo wetu kama court.
When you are registering, maybe your fingerprints were okay. After some times, they evaporate, Mr. Speaker. So, you discuss.
And Michael Yard is part of the grand scheme to use technology to rig in Raila Amolo Odinga.
Now, the National Assembly has passed all proposed amendments to the Elections Act amid protests from the opposition. The Jubilee Party took advantage of its numbers in the House to push through the changes to the Election Laws Amendment Act. This morning, MPs debated changes proposed by the Legal Affairs Committee, which, among other things, reinstated provisions for manual identification of voters in case the electronic system fails. The House also adopted a proposal for manual transmission of results, which ODM has opposed.
When you are registering, maybe your fingerprints were okay. After some times, they evaporate, Mr. Speaker. So, you discuss. They get disfigured. They get disfigured, Mr. Speaker. And so you require an alternative method to identify this. And IBC, for your information, in fact, had to identify those people by sending text and a photo appearing. And it was accepted, and people voted. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As the desire of the House, put the question that the Election Laws Amendment Bill number 3, National Assembly Bill number 63 of 2015 be now read a third time. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. As many of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it.
Right before I start, let me introduce my guests. Right by my side here is Paul Wafula, journalist at the Standard Media Group. Right next to him is lovely lady Roslyn Obala, friend to the show, also a journalist here at Standard, and of course Wahome Thuku, advocate of the High Court of Kenya and journalist. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
We seem to be in silly season. I've said this before, but it's crazy things happening in Parliament. Now we're talking about fingerprints disappearing and all the rest of it. Paul, what do you make of are we going back to analog? Or what is happening?
The moment we allowed Aden Duale into this debate, we just lost it. And you can listen to what he says. You know, this is a leader of majority in Parliament, and if this is a person who is leading people towards some specific end, then you surely have lost it. If you've been in this country and you've been able to look at what happens at a contentious election, and it's not been too far away, we looked at how post-election violence, if you've gone to the IDP camps, you'll expect our leaders to be a lot more mature and to deal with these issues seriously. Because, I mean, if you look at the issues that are involved, Jubilee side is not proposing something that's unreasonable. They are saying in case the election fails. But why sneak it in? Why force it through?
Did they sneak it in, or did they just say this?
Why did they make amendments when they had already agreed on a deal and they agreed that this thing is going to be passed the way it is? Why did they come back and then decide they're going to amend it? Why these amendments? Why not consult the opposition that has been pushing for this issue?
But my question about that, Roslyn, is that the document was negotiated, then it became an act of parliament. At that point, doesn't it become the property of members of parliament and by extension the Kenyan people, meaning they can legislate, they can amend it?
Okay, it's an act of parliament, but at the end of the day, this is a law for all Kenyans.
Right.
Remember, when you have MPs in parliament, they're just there to exercise that power on behalf of the people.
Right.
So they cannot assume that what they want is exactly what the people want. They also have to go back to the people. And the Constitution is very clear when it talks about public participation. Did they go, and is that what their people at the grassroots want? Because remember, we lost lives when people were demonstrating to have these amendments done. And once we've just had a law that we can't even say is hardly 2 months old, if we have anything to amend, then we need to go back to Wanjiko. And remember, we had the select committee, which its term expired. And we can still go back to Parliament through a motion and just revive this for the sake of peace in this country. What we are seeing now is an acrimony that we really don't want when we are going to an election just 6 months to 6 months, because when Parliament breaks, it will be just 6 months to 2 months to the election. So it is really a sad affair, and the message they're sending to the public is that, look, 2017 election might just be a reverse of what we saw in 2007.
But surely, Wahome, can we go back to Wanjiku for every amendment? Will any business happen in the House?
Certainly not. She is quite wrong on that. Parliament enacts laws, it amends them as it wishes without reference. And if you are talking about a constitutional amendment, that we would have a provision for either doing a referendum or anything like that. Today, Parliament has passed several other amendments. You're not even saying whether they went back to Ajiko for that. This is the work of Parliament. And once we elect them, we assume that they will represent us in the House. What they are doing there is, in essence, what we wanted them to do. But speaking on this thing about allowing the two systems, because it's actually having the two systems, the electronic and the manual system.
Right.
Because we are being pushed to see it as if it's just one, discarding one and going for the other.
Right.
I am for the two, for both systems, yeah.
Okay, Mohammed, let's just stick with matters elections. And meanwhile, opposition chief Raila Odinga has said that there will be no election next year after the Jubilee administration's amendment to the Elections Act. Raila accused President Uhuru Kenyatta of pushing through the amendments without consulting all stakeholders. He said the election laws were negotiated and both sides had agreed not to amend them.
Hiyo sheria ilibuniwa baada ya kuketi chini na wataalamu ambao wanajua yale ambayo yanawezekana na yale ambayo hayawezekani. Hatujui kwa sababu gani Jubilee wanasema yale ambayo yamependekezwa ndani ya hiyo sheria haiwezi kutimizwa. Manake nchi mingi ya Kiafrika wametumia hizo. Kwa nini Kenya haziwezi kuifanya hivyo? Kwa sababu gani? Kwa sababu jamaa wamezoea kuiba kura kupitia kwa ile manual voter identification. Wanazoea kufufusha wafu na kuwafanya wale wafu wapige kura. Kisha baadaye warudi kwa makaburi yao. Hayo ndio sisi tumekataa mara hii. Kama wanataka kuendelea kama bwana Kabila kule DRC, waendelee. Vile tulisema jana, ati no transparency, no elections. Hiyo ndio msimamo wetu kama CORD.
So CORD, they're all for the electronic system. Mahoma, you are saying you prefer both?
Yeah, I prefer both. And just to correct what Honorable Raila is saying there, you see, we are being made to think that the country is going manual, like we are doing away with every electronic system we have to go manual. It's very clear that you revert to manual when you are not able to manage for whatever reasons. And so many people will tell you in all manner of ways that electronic system or any technology can fail. That is so. In fact, wait a minute. Let me prosecute this to the end. We always say that when you are enacting a law, you look at the mischief that law is addressing. Why are you doing it? And why are you amending or even enacting it? Because we wouldn't want a situation where the law has held our hands. We can't revert back.
But in 2013, we reverted to manual, quote unquote, at some point without a law. It's just common sense. If one system breaks down, then use the other one. Why are we insisting that this must be on the books?
Now, fair enough. Then we enacted a law that says for transmission of presidential results,
right,
we do it electronically purely without reverting to manual. Now that is tying our hands. Once you do that, you better have the two systems within the law. Then you discussed on the modalities of fitting one or either. Let me say, you can even do with manual. I don't know.
That is an ideal situation, and Wahome rightly put it. The problem with lawyers is sometimes they want to be very realistic in the arguments. I mean, they're realistic when you hear it. But if you come down on the ground, he's actually talking about mischief, and actually the law is supposed to address some level of mischief. If you look at the thinking around this kind of law, it was because we know what has happened with having a manual system in this country, and we are looking at Jubilee government, a youthful government, a government that talks about digital. What are they afraid of? Why can't we first try as hard as possible to make sure that this election works? rather than starting to have some level of thinking that we can actually go manual. Once you go prepared that it's going to fail, it will actually fail. I mean, look at a pilot when he leaves off the ground. When do you think that the aeroplane is going to fail? Do you have another aircraft flying below it?
If we
your argument is right.
Precisely.
So, but you just have to take off and decide that
gentlemen, allow the lady to speak for a second.
I think what we're not also considering here is a law that was just amended and what was discussed by the two sides. Remember, there was the introduction of us having an electoral identification. There was also the registration of voters electronically. And there was also the transmission of results electronically. What was not being done electronically was the actual voting. So because of that, we need to tell the public that what they negotiated and agreed is what now we are saying we are going to have a plan B, which means we're already preparing those who are going to handle elections for an eventuality of where we are going to revert manually. And remember, why Kenyans have always gone have chaos is because it's not even about the actual stealing of elections, it's lack of confidence in the entire process. And elections is not a one-off thing. You cannot say that we'll only wait for the election day and see what happens. It is a continuous process. So already we are preparing the country that something might happen. So already people are prepared, either we're not going to have the true reflection of what Wanjiku wants, or they are going to rig elections. Why can't we give Kenyans that confidence that what we will have on August 8, 2017 will be a very credible election that all candidates will accept?
How do you give that confidence?
Julie, in a country where you can send money on mobile phone to almost any part of this country, why can't we set up these systems on the ground? Why can't we go to the polling stations and be able to establish?
Why
can't we go down
and
let me prosecute my point that go down to the ground. I mean, look at even the CCK, I mean the Communication Authority of Kenya. It has put out a list of areas in terms of 2G coverage and 3G coverage. You find it's 99%, 100% in various parts of the country. There are a few places where, of course, you say there are pockets of places where there's no connectivity. So the law should be able to address that. But having said that, you should be able to put in place a situation whereby you are at least sure that this system will not fail.
Julie,
which you can test. You have 6 months to test it.
We are saying, and it is very clear, and that's the point that people are missing, that we are already at that. We have M-Pesa, we have KRA. You see, even when you're making a returns for KRA, when it fails, what do? They allow us to take our papers there.
There's no manual right now.
Look here.
There's no manual.
Fair enough, that's what we are saying. It should be. In fact, it should have. What we are saying is that once you have two systems, the point should only be to ensure that what you have on the electronic record is similar to what is on the mind. And once you have that, you can't have ghost voters coming to vote, because all these are audited, okay? So you have checks. Let's not assume that we are so fine, we can never fail technologically. We can. And when it fails, when the law has tied us, because all what people are saying is that don't let the law tie you. Okay, do it electronically, but don't
let me make my point.
Wafula, hold that thought. We're still on matters elections.
Yes.
We'll continue to make the points. Now, the special sitting to pass amendments went ahead as the High Court declined to nullify a Gazette notice that allowed the Speaker to convene the sitting this morning. Justice George Odunga declined to stop Parliament from discussing amendments to the election law, saying there were no compelling reasons to issue an injunction or nullify the Gazette notice. Court is now seeking the nullification of the amendments to the Election Laws Amendment Act 2016, and the coalition has promised civil action starting January 4th to protest the passing of the amendments.
I have considered the positions adopted by the various parties herein, and whereas this court must protect against a situation in which what is proposed to be done will be fait accompli unless halted, in this case, I do not see what will bar this court from reversing the decision to be taken by Parliament if the same are illegal and unconstitutional. The applicant may still fashion its remedies in such a way that the implementation of the said amendment may not only be suspended, but may be nullified altogether. At this stage, however, the said amendments are yet to be passed. This court cannot foretell whether they will in fact see the light of the day. Having considered the issue raised before me in this application at this stage, I do not find any compelling reason why Parliament ought to be stopped from proceedings with the debate. Thereafter, depending on what it decides, this court will be at liberty to scrutinize this process to see whether it did actually comply with the law and the Constitution.
Right, Wahome, I'll start with you. Please kindly unpack that ruling for us.
Sure. Let me just say this first. It's the first time I'm hearing this judge now being said. In the morning, I heard Duale saying he will discuss him in Parliament because he is always said to be pro-court. For once, I'm hearing him now ruling it the other way around. But his argument from an advocate's point is very, very reasonable, that you can't stop Parliament from carrying on with the process. Wait until they have done what they have to do, then look at the product of the law they have come up with, okay? The amendments they have made. At that point, if you think there's anything to nullify, then proceed to court. I think they were just going ahead of time. It was premature, and that is precisely what the judge should
But does
have
that justify Honorable Duale saying that next year they're going to discuss him? And
I think that is very unfortunate coming from a leader of a majority, and especially talking about another arm of government.
Right.
But if you look at it on face value, I think court just rushed, and especially the lead counsel, because he's a member of the Senate that has been bashing the judiciary all through, saying that the judiciary has been injuncting Parliament, and that's another arm of government that is allowed to transact their business. So in this case, if court was aggrieved by what was happening in Parliament, the best way was to allow Parliament to transact its business. Once they're done, then they have the Hansard. They have all the evidence that they can adduce in court and just say, this is the reason why we think this law should not.
What if they felt the whole process was unprocedural?
But that is now, once it's through in Parliament, because what they were trying to do is sub judice. You want to start a process that is already active in another institution. Yeah.
Yes.
So once they're done, then they can now proceed to court and say this law is unconstitutional, because remember, this law, the National Assembly can also now purport to say they passed a law that the Senate is not part of. Yeah, so we expect that this bill will also go to the Senate, which if it doesn't go again, that gives court again another upper hand to also move to court and just cite that.
I think the judge came even to make this ruling from a weak perspective, Julie, because, I mean, it had already taken a political angle, and Adan Dwell is already saying that we know this judge and what he's capable of.
But he actually ruled in the favor of the government.
So the ruling was already kind of, everybody was expecting that if he rules, even if court had a good reason, even if he had ruled on the side of court, it would have actually ended up being another political issue. So ruling in a political environment, as it were, it's a very difficult decision to make, and I think the judge made the right call. That was actually the safest way to go.
But I also don't think the judges pay much attention to what the public, because when you hear a judicial officer talk, they always say we are guided by the evidence adduced before us,
Right.
and the law. So in this
They
case,
always say,
yes. So I don't think,
Well,
and that's how it's supposed to be.
A good judge should take what you call judicial notice, take notice of what is happening around. But out of this, one of the things we can say, we have a judge here and we have Duale. One of the things we can point out and say is that this is a government with three institutions, okay? Judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. None of them should appear to be interfering with the other. See, the judge has just decided that let Parliament do its work, bring whatever they have done to us, we look at it and decide. Let Duale also not think that he can intimidate a judge.
But
because
Wahome, isn't the job of the judiciary to interfere with other people technically, because people run there for solutions and they have to now kind of be
sure,
mediator.
but there's a point at which you interfere, okay? You can't stop a process. In fact, at some point, you interfere by ordering the process to restart again, something like that. The only point is that the judiciary is respectful of the executive. Now, let Duale not think. I wonder what he would do even if he was to discuss him in Parliament. You see, the process of even removing a judge from the judiciary is quite explained in the Constitution. So if Duale has a problem with this judge, let him follow the due process. Let him not make it look like it's a political kind of appointment.
Agree.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I also agree.
Well, we're staying with matters amendments still. Following the passing of the amendments to the election laws, Opposition Coalition Court has announced its intention to conduct civil action starting January 4th, 2017, this month to the general election. The amendments allow for an alternative mechanism for identification and transmission of election results in the event of technological failure. Reasonable enough on the face of it, and yet the stage has been set for a bitter battle for the House on the Hill.
And we have agreed that in the light of what has happened, the high level of impunity demonstrated in Parliament, we have no option but to take the invitation by Jubilee to go back to the streets for a very peaceful, decisive mass action. It is unavoidable, it is engineered, it is what Jubilee have asked for.
Mass action unavoidable, really? Is there no other alternative?
You see, when you play into the hands of somebody, like for instance, at this point in time, what this law is saying is really not something that's unreasonable. I mean, it is saying that should the electronic system fail, we should go back to the manual system. Anybody, a right-thinking member of the society will tell you that that is not too much to ask for.
Right.
But having said that, Julie, the process, how it's being done, is what the problem is. I mean, why don't you have the same people that negotiated this? Why don't you bring them back on the table and say, look, we missed this point. We didn't do our job properly.
But who's supposed to extend an olive branch? Because clearly the administration wanted to push through the amendments. So what are court's options?
That is the point. That's what I'm saying. Now you have gone there and you've allowed them now to go back to the streets. Code strategy here, as you see it, they're going to look at it, painting the government as corrupt, one. Now you have given them another chance to show the government as a dictatorship. Three, when they go on the street, they're calling it a peaceful mass action. It won't be peaceful. You will see tear gas on the street. And once you see tear gas, then it becomes violent. That is what the opposition wants. So you are going into an election, and this is what you are creating. Why don't you make it so evident that everything that the opposition has asked for has been provided for? That, look, you have lost this election fair and square. But now that you're going to go into a manual, Julie, and remember, if something happens to technology and they go manual, that will give them another opportunity to say, look, this is what we are talking about.
True, Roslyn.
You see, again, you can never trust human beings. We can give them the law and we just give them an olive branch to now just revert manually. You never know, because on the elections day, we've seen whereby elections, the electronic devices work.
Yeah.
When we go to the main elections, they fail. You saw what happened in 2013. Yeah. And elections in this country have been very emotive since the last years, even when we were young. And I think it is high time we diverted from that and just have a peaceful election where once we are done, leaders can shake hands and congratulate each other. But this is a case where on the election year, we are seeing people going back to the streets. What do you expect on the D-Day of elections?
Right.
People will even be killing each other before then. Right. And you can also not tell us that you're going to have peaceful protest. The next minute, your neighbor will be turning against you. Yeah, is that a country we want, where all of us are seeing each other in terms of tribal bases and not as sisters and brothers?
It's not, for sure, and our leaders know that more than anybody else, Wahome. But we're seeing the same kind of campaign rhetoric that ends up in violence.
Let me put it this way. It's the second time now in a few months that we are seeing ourselves questioning the process of Parliament. Because Parliament is there to do exactly what it did. Whether that pleases you or it does not, it's still parliamentary process. Now, the question you ask yourself is that if you ask for mass action, nobody has a monopoly of mass action. Anyone can, the other side can also ask for their own mass action in support of. But this culture now growing of questioning that once Parliament has done what we don't feel is right, we resort to another way of addressing it. That should not be the case. And that's exactly what they're trying to do.
But don't they need an avenue of redress?
I think maybe just to revert on what Doko was saying, that Parliament does not need Wanjiku to legislate. When it comes to a law, it's a long process. And remember, that's why a bill is introduced. and it is published, and members of the public are called in to present their memorandums, and that is exactly what informs the law. Even if sometimes our leaders decide to ignore the memorandums that have come in. Right. In this case, did we see the public come in? Were they given that opportunity to also present the stakeholders and that? And that's why we saw the opposition leader saying all stakeholders were not involved, because the person who sponsored the bill, which is the legal affairs chairman, Chepkonga, said these were proposals by IBC. Yes. So did we follow up and see that IBC actually brought on board all stakeholders, and this is exactly what they wanted?
Yeah, you make a good point.
Those are good reasons for now taking the next action to court. Okay? If you think there was no public participation, and public participation is so debatable, okay? There's always a question as to whether even Parliament itself is not part of the public. That becomes a big issue. But if you think that there was no public participation, then you can take that for nullification of this. And
but also, Wahome, as an advocate, the preamble of the Constitution talks about members exercising sovereign power on behalf of the people. So they are there because, in fact, if talking about the arms, Parliament should be the first arm of government, because it is the one that is exercising power directly. So in this case, MPs cannot purport to act on their own. They must seek the people who put them there to know exactly, is this what they want? Because if that's what they're doing, yes.
This document, negotiated document, was kind of outside of the law, if I'm not
remember,
wrong.
all the stakeholders were, you remember the sittings, we were having public sittings every day. Every institution came in, even the political parties brought in their memorandum.
Remember, this is a special, this is a special kind of law. It's not really the kind of ordinary law that has been brought in by a private member or the government. Look at where it started from. It started from the streets, and they had to negotiate this. Now, if you look at that process, what I'm saying is, why can this process go back to where it was and be done in open and in good faith?
Wafula, are we supposed to negotiate laws or legislate?
Precisely. You're not supposed to have a special law more special than the other because somebody feels it's more special. Let me say this. This is one of the laws that removed the IEBC, the commissioners, through the back door. Okay? We all know the constitutional process of removing commissioners. But we decided that no, we can't go to Parliament. Maybe the public participation would have said, let's go to Parliament. We said you can't take them to Parliament. Let's create a way, a panya route through which we can exit them.
Okay, well, hold on to the panya route for a bit. Let me do the Twitter poll. We're asking you tonight on our poll, should CORD carry out civic action to protest the election amendments? Should CORD carry out civic action to protest the election law amendment? You can tweet me at Julie Masiga, at KTN News. The hashtag is News Sources. Right now, we're going for a quick break. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.